big thing, I guess, that happened over the last week was Tucker Carlson getting fired. I guess I don't know if that's even officially been said yet. The official thing is just they parted ways, but it seems pretty clear that it was Fox who decided to part ways. But yeah, he's gone. It's one of these things where like it's amazing what a week can do. Like I remember when it first got announced, my first feeling was like, no way, they canned Tucker Carlson. And now like a week goes by and looking back on it, I'm like, how was he ever on Fox News? How would they ever allow this guy to be on the 8 p.m. hour saying the CIA killed Kennedy? You know, like it's just insane. And it's you know, I don't know, but personally, you know, me and you, we kind of have an interesting perspective on this. I briefly mentioned this on Rogan's podcast, but we actually had a segment. It wasn't technically a segment, but we just had done so many things on Tucker that the fans started calling it the Contra Carlson segment, because we'd take apart like some of his like kind of populist economic stuff. And he was, you know, he was real bad when talking about like free market capitalism.
We need to pay for all young men to be married.
Yeah. It was like, it was just bad, the banning driving cars and stuff like that. But so it's not as if like I was ever a guy who just agreed with Tucker on everything. I have a lot of disagreements with him on economics. I think he's way too hawkish on China. There's issues, but still, like, how do you not just see things in their totality and go, what a fucking hero he was? Like, dude, during COVID, during all of COVID, he was like the most balls out guy. And he was the biggest voice in cable news. And he was just like railing against the COVID regime. And then the war in Ukraine, he's been amazing on that, having the best guys on. And like having really good left-wingers on, you know, having Glenn Greenwald and people like that on, having Jimmy Dore and like these guys to like really argue against the warfare machine. So good on that stuff. So good on all of the fucking like creepy new totalitarian shit. And like, I don't know, those are just, it's like he was great on the most important issues in the world. And I just like, I'm grateful for him doing it. And it's weird, like you see people who, you know, particularly even like the kind of like, I don't know what are called like the regime libertarians. What, you know, I know they don't like that term, but I don't really like a lot of the terms they use for me. So we can stick with that. But you know what I'm talking about, like just kind of like the old guard of the LP who we overthrew, and the kind of like Cato Reason types who all just like, not all, but a lot of them have so much disdain for Tucker. And like they just hate him. And I think it's because of like some of the cultural stuff. I think he got a lot of heat for a few things. He got a lot of heat for his the way he talked about the 2020 election, even though if you actually listen to him, he was never saying like the Dominion votes were flipped. He was always talking about like, you know, the Hunter Biden story being squashed or things like that. He got a lot of heat for talking about what they called like the great replacement theory, where he was just talking about how like the Democrats...
Jews will not replace us.
Yeah, well,
I watched the show. I heard him chanting.
They were wearing some Tucker Carlson like outfits when they were on that.
Hey, listen, the Daily Stormer makes some good points. You can't repeat all of them on the Fox News program, but
yeah, but you pick the good ones, and then you go with that.
It's called editing.
But he was, you know, what's interesting is that even with that shit that like he got so much heat for, it was like what he was saying was basically that like, yeah, the Democrats are trying to replace the population and import new voters. Like that's their whole plan. And the funny thing about it is that if you watch MSNBC for years, they've been openly bragging about this. They've literally just openly say it. Like Joyanne Reed has been saying for years that the browning of America is going to destroy Republicans. Good luck now, Republicans, but soon you'll be put out of business because it's going to be a majority Hispanic country and all. You know what I mean? And so it's like they can talk about it and brag about how great it is, but if you talk about it and go, "This is what they're doing," and I don't think it's so great, they're like, "You Nazi!" Like it's just anyway. The thing that's kind of interesting to me is that a lot of those type of a lot of the kind of libertarian camp who's not a big fan of me, they'll call me like a right-wing libertarian. That's the nicest term they'd call me, which I don't really consider myself a right-wing libertarian, but I'm also like I'm not offended by it. Like, okay, If that's what I am, then that's what I am. If that's what you consider it, whatever. Not really interested in getting into the semantics. Okay. People define left and right differently, so it all like kind of depends on what your definition is. But the truth is that they like, okay, if there was, let's say there was like someone on MSNBC who was more progressive leaning, you know, and maybe they had some cultural issues that me and you really disagree with them on. Maybe they were like bad on, you know, some economic stuff. They were for Medicare for all and for raising the minimum wage, you know, but they were so good on COVID and they were so good on the war in Ukraine. And they were talking about the Federal Reserve and how the Federal Reserve created all of this inflation and how the Federal Reserve has distorted the economy to the benefit of like the billionaire class at the expense of the working people. Like, and that guy got fired. Me and you would not be like, yeah, good. Finally, this toxic hate. Finally, this Medicare for all talk is off the, you know, we'd be like, shit, that sucks. Because that guy was so good on so many. And so it's almost like I feel like those libertarians who are celebrating Tucker Carlson, they're telling on themselves. You're like, oh, so you don't really care that much about like being anti-war, exposing the Federal Reserve, being against COVID tyranny. Because how is that not a big deal to you? You could be so bad on every other issue. But if you're good on war and the Fed and COVID, like you would never hear me not at least be like, that person should be on air. Like I'm rooting for that person to be on air. And then throw in the fact that they generated the biggest audience in cable news. I don't know. It's just fucking nuts to me.
It doesn't matter how big your audience is if you're not going to be nice to your employees. And the employees that you never met can get on the news and talk about how you were mean to them and they didn't like the job that they continued working. What we need is corporations that don't make money, but they're nice to the people that work there.
It's such a weird thing, man, and it's true with Rogan. I think it's kind of less true with Rogan now than it was for a little while there, where he really had like a target on his back. It seems almost like they launched the biggest cancel attempt ever, and it failed so miserably that they just accepted defeat with him. Like there doesn't even seem to really be an effort to try to cancel Rogan anymore. But there was such a huge one, and there was such a huge one for Tucker all along that it's just like, it's really interesting. It's like, oh, the most popular guys you would think were the most hated. It's something like, you know, when they show those, what is it, like on Rotten Tomatoes? Well, they'll show the disparity between the you know, the official reviewers and the general public. Right. And sometimes it's like, it would like Dave Chappelle's special.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Where it's like 2% of the fucking, you know, of the official reviewers, whatever they call them, they liked it. And like 98% of the general public. Like there's such a disparity between like, you know, like if you, and then they create this thing like on CNN or on MSNBC or something, or in the New York Times or whatever, if they're talking about Tucker Carlson, they're talking about him like, well, this is obviously a very controversial figure who says wild things. And but you're like, no, he's not controversial. He's the most popular by far. You're fucking controversial. Like, but they still like, it reminds me of when Brian Stelter used to talk about Rogan. And he'd talk about him with like no sense of like, you have been rejected by the people and he has been accepted. His audience is 25 times bigger than yours. And you're still going like, well, I think he stepped out of line with that last bit, or it's just so bizarre.
That's the only play they have. I mean, that's what they did with the COVID vaccines. Hey, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist if you're not getting this. And everybody has gotten this. And it turned out the numbers prior to mandates, the compliance was like 30%. Yeah. That's their only play, is trying to shame you into, hey, this is what good, honest people think. We're the credible news station. Everything that's outside of this is crazy, and only crazy people believe it.